He was the richest man in the world. He had personally crushed the greatest slave revolt in Roman history. He had funded the careers of both Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. He was one of three men who effectively ruled the most powerful republic on earth. And on a flat, featureless plain in the Syrian desert, he watched 10,000 horsemen destroy everything he had ever built. 20,000 of his men died before sundown. His son's severed head was paraded past him on a spear. And when it was over, when the richest, most powerful man in Rome lay dead in the dirt, his enemies cut off his head, filled it with molten gold, and used it as a stage prop in a theater performance. But here is what no one tells you about this story. The battle itself was only the beginning. Because what happened at Carrhae in 53 BC didn't just kill one man and one army. It killed a republic. To understand why the Battle of Carrhae matters, why it is arguably the most consequential military defeat in Roman history, not just the most humiliating, you need to understand one thing about the political structure of Rome in 53 BC. The Roman Republic at that moment was being held together by three men: Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. The First Triumvirate, the unofficial power-sharing arrangement between these three, was the only thing keeping Rome from tearing itself apart. Caesar needed Crassus's money. Pompey needed Crassus's political connections, and Crassus needed both of them for legitimacy. Without Crassus, the arrangement collapsed. Without the arrangement, Caesar and Pompey had nothing keeping them from each other's throats. Remove Crassus from history, and there is no Roman civil war, no Caesar crossing the Rubicon, no death of the Republic, no Augustus, potentially no Roman Empire at all, or at least not in the form that shaped 2,000 years of Western civilization. Everything that followed, every seismic event of the next century of Roman history, can be traced in a direct line back to one afternoon in the Syrian desert. 10,000 horsemen, 35,000 Roman soldiers, and a battle that should never have been fought. This is that story. And by the end of it, you'll understand why the real casualty at Carrhae wasn't Marcus Licinius Crassus. It was the world he came from. Before we get to the desert, we need to understand who Marcus Licinius Crassus actually was. Because most people know him, if they know him at all, as the third wheel of the triumvirate. The bland one, the money guy, the one who isn't Caesar or Pompey. That framing does not come close to capturing the reality. Crassus was born into a wealthy Roman family, but the real foundation of his personal fortune was built during the political purges of the dictator Sulla in the 80s BC, a period when enemies were publicly murdered and their property seized by the state. Crassus found a method of wealth generation so cynical it became legendary even in ancient Rome. He built Rome's first private fire brigade. When a building caught fire, and in ancient Rome this happened constantly, in a city of wooden tenements and open flames, Crassus's men would arrive, and then they would negotiate. While the building burned, he would approach the panicking owner and offer to buy the property on the spot at a fraction of its actual value. And only then, if a deal was struck, would his men actually put the fire out. Refuse the deal, they watched it burn. Through methods like these, Crassus accumulated wealth so vast that ancient sources record him claiming no man was truly wealthy unless he could personally finance an entire Roman legion from his own pocket. By 53 BC, his fortune was estimated at 200 million sesterces, enough to fund the Roman military for years. And yet, and this is the psychological engine that drives the entire story of Carrhae, it was never enough, because Crassus lived in the shadow of two men. Pompey, who had conquered the East and been celebrated with a triumph so magnificent it lasted 2 full days. Caesar, who was at that very moment turning the conquest of Gaul into a legend that would echo through centuries. Military glory, the kind that makes crowds go silent when you walk into a room, was the one thing money couldn't buy. Ancient historians are unanimous. Crassus initiated the Parthian campaign not out of strategic necessity, not out of Roman interest, but out of personal ambition. To finally score the military victory that would put him on equal footing with his rivals, he chose Parthia, and in doing so, he chose catastrophe. Here is what makes that choice even more indefensible in hindsight. The Armenian king Artavasdes personally offered Crassus a safer invasion route through Armenia, with allied troops experienced in fighting Parthians. Across terrain where Roman infantry had tactical advantages. Crassus declined. He chose instead to march directly through Mesopotamia. Flat, open, vast, no cover, no elevation, no defensive terrain of any kind. A landscape almost perfectly designed for cavalry. Which is exactly what was waiting for him on the other side. While Crassus was marching his legions toward personal glory, the Parthian king Orodes II sent his best general to intercept them. His name was Shurna, and in 53 BC he was probably 29 years old. Ancient sources describe Shurna in almost mythological terms. Tall, strikingly handsome, traveling with a personal retinue of 200 attendants and a baggage train of 1,000 camels. Wearing kohl around his eyes in the Parthian fashion. He was reportedly the second most powerful man in the Parthian Empire. So powerful that even in the middle of a war, his own king was quietly afraid of him. But what made Shurna genuinely dangerous had nothing to do with his appearance. He brought 10,000 cavalry, no infantry whatsoever. 9,000 mounted archers and 1,000 cataphracts, warriors encased head to toe in layered iron scales, riding horses equally armored, carrying lances long enough to skewer 2 men simultaneously. Against 35,000 Roman legionaries, the finest heavy infantry in the ancient world. Trained to march through anything, hold formation under fire, close the distance to the enemy, and kill at close range. The system that had built an empire. Shurna's plan was elegant in its brutality. He would never let them close that distance at all. The Parthian composite recurved bow was a weapon Rome had encountered, but never faced in this volume or this mobility. It could launch arrows with enough force to punch through Roman armor at 200 yards, not from a fixed position, from horseback, at full speed. And while the Romans stood in formation, shields locked, waiting for the enemy to come close enough to fight like a proper army should, Shurna had one more piece on the board that Rome never anticipated. A camel train, hundreds of camels loaded with spare arrows positioned behind the Parthian line, ready to resupply his horse archers in rotation. Continuously, indefinitely. The Romans were about to discover that their entire tactical doctrine rested on an assumption that was no longer true. The battle began on a scorching June morning in 53 BC, on the flat plain near the town of Carrhae, modern-day Harran, in southeastern Turkey. Crassus deployed his army in a massive hollow square, a defensive formation, already a signal of uncertainty. The Romans gripped their pila, heavy javelins, devastating at close range, and waited for the enemy to charge. Shurna sent his cataphracts in first. The ground shook as 1,000 armored horses thundered toward the Roman lines. Then, at the last possible moment, they pulled short. Not a charge, a display. Designed to compress the Roman formation tighter, bunching the legionaries together into a dense, overlapping, barely mobile mass. Then the horse archers came. They rode in from every direction simultaneously, flowing around both flanks, encircling the square, and they loosed volley after volley of arrows that came down from above. Punching through helmets, finding gaps in shields, driving through armor from the sides. The Romans raised their shields. The arrows found the gaps. Men began to fall. The formation held, and they waited for the arrows to stop. The arrows did not stop. The camel train was right there, restocking archers in rotation. No gap, no pause, just iron falling out of the sky hour after hour in the Syrian summer heat. The Romans sweated in their armor. They bled from 100 small wounds. They held formation because there was nothing else to do, and the Parthians, unhurried, rode around them in circles and kept shooting. I want you to actually sit with that image for a second and drop this in the comments because it genuinely fascinates me. The Romans were the best soldiers in the world, disciplined, experienced. Veterans of a dozen campaigns, and there was absolutely nothing they could do. The enemy was always out of reach, no target to charge, no line to break. Just standing in the desert sun, shields raised, bleeding. What do you think that does to a soldier's mind, not his body, but his mind, after the first hour, after the second, after the third? Tell me below. In desperation, Crassus made the decision that sealed the battle's outcome. He sent his son Publius, young, brave, beloved by the troops, with a detachment of Gallic cavalry and supporting infantry to break the encirclement, chase the archers, force a close engagement. Do something, the Parthians feigned retreat. Publius charged after them, pulling further and further from the main body, until he was isolated on open ground with the cataphracts closing around him from all sides. Surrounded, outnumbered, with no hope of support from his father's position, Publius chose suicide over capture. The Parthians returned carrying his head on a spear. Ancient historians describe Crassus standing motionless, staring at his son's head while his army continued to collapse around him. Something in him broke at that moment. Every account agrees. The commander who had been indecisive all day became something worse, absent. Present in body, gone in everything else. By nightfall, 20,000 Romans lay dead on that flat plain. Another 10,000 had been captured. Crassus ordered a retreat toward Carrhae under cover of darkness, leaving his wounded where they lay to be slaughtered. It was the worst Roman military defeat since Hannibal had destroyed 3 legions at Cannae 144 years before, and it was about to get worse. In the days after the battle, Crassus retreated toward Carrhae with the survivors. Shurna offered negotiations. A parley, terms. His officers urged refusal. They were near the hills. Rocky terrain where Parthian cavalry couldn't maneuver. If they reached high ground, they could survive, regroup, perhaps escape north toward Armenia. His own soldiers threatened him. Demanded he negotiate. Crassus, a broken man in the wreckage of his ambitions, went to meet Shurna. It was a trap. A skirmish broke out at the parley. Crassus and his entire party were killed. What happened next is where ancient sources diverge, and I want to be honest about that. The most famous version of this story, that molten gold was poured into Crassus's severed head in mockery of his greed. The richest man in Rome force-fed the thing he spent his entire life accumulating. Some historians consider this a later embellishment, poetic justice, invented by writers who couldn't resist the symbolism. Others treat it as credible. What both sides agree on is the symbolism was completely intentional regardless of literal truth. The man who consumed Rome's wealth, consumed in turn. But the detail I cannot get out of my head, the one that belongs in no history textbook but is completely documented, is what happened at the Parthian royal court at Seleucia. King Orodes was watching a performance of Euripides' The Bacchae when Crassus's head arrived from the battlefield. In the play's climactic scene, the character Agave enters holding the severed head of her own son, killed by her own hands in a religious frenzy, unrecognized until too late. At that exact theatrical moment, an actor named Jason produced Crassus's actual head and used it as a prop on stage. The audience erupted in applause, assuming it was an extraordinarily realistic theatrical effect. The richest man in the world, the conqueror of Spartacus. The man who had bankrolled the careers of the 2 most powerful Romans alive. His final appearance was as an unscripted prop in someone else's play. And then Orodes did something that tells you everything you need to know about how power actually operates. Shurna, who had saved the Parthian Empire from invasion, who had destroyed a Roman army 3 times his size, who had proved himself the greatest cavalry commander of his age, was executed by his own king within months of his greatest victory. No charges, no trial. Just a monarch who looked at the man who had just saved his kingdom and saw instead a man who had grown too popular, too celebrated, too dangerous to leave alive. The most brilliant general of his era, dead before 30, killed by the jealousy of the ruler he had just rescued. The victors of Carrhae managed to destroy each other almost as efficiently as they had destroyed Rome. After the battle, the Parthians marched 10,000 Roman prisoners east, deep into the empire's interior. Some were enslaved. Some were settled as soldier farmers on Parthia's eastern frontier. An entire community of former legionaries dropped into the middle of Asia and left to disappear into history. And then there is a footnote so strange, I almost didn't include it. A Han Dynasty Chinese historian, writing roughly a century after Carrhae, recorded the capture of soldiers in Central Asia, whose battlefield formation he described as resembling fish scales, men locking large shields together in a pattern unlike anything Central Asian. Armies used Some historians believe these may have been descendants of Carrhae's prisoners, Roman legionaries, who had been pushed so far east through the Parthian slave trade that they ended up on the edge. The Han Empire's sphere of influence. The theory is genuinely contested, and most mainstream historians treat it with healthy skepticism. But the mere possibility, Romans from the Syrian desert ending up within range of Han Dynasty China, tells you something extraordinary about what Carrhae scattered to the winds. Back in Rome, the wound was of a different and far more lasting kind. The Parthians had captured the legionary eagles. The aquili, the sacred golden standards that every Roman legion carried as its physical and spiritual identity. To lose your eagle in battle was not just military defeat. It was a declaration by the universe that Rome could be humiliated, that there were limits to what Roman soldiers could do, that the red-crested, ironclad machine that had conquered half the known world could be stopped by men on horseback with bows. Recovering those standards became a national obsession. Every Roman general who marched east for the next generation did so with eagle recovery as part of his mandate. Mark Antony tried and failed. The wound stayed open. It took 33 years. In 20 BC, the Emperor Augustus, who by that point had presided over the Republic's final collapse, multiple civil wars, and the transformation of Rome into an empire, negotiated the return of the captured standards through diplomacy. No battle, no military campaign, pure negotiation, and he celebrated it as one of the greatest military triumphs of his reign. He issued coins, commissioned statues, erected monuments. And this is the question I want you to take into the comments, because I've been turning it over ever since I started researching this video. Augustus won back the eagle's standards through paperwork and diplomacy, then sold it to the Roman public as a military triumph. And it worked. The people needed it to be a victory. Is that political genius, or is it something more troubling? A society so damaged by humiliation that it will accept the performance of recovery over actual recovery? Because I think that question is not even slightly limited to ancient Rome. Tell me what you think below. Let me bring this home. Because here is what almost every retelling of Carrhae leaves on the floor. When Crassus died in the Syrian desert on that June afternoon, the First Triumvirate died with him. The three-man arrangement, Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, each checking the ambitions of the other two, collapsed. It had never been a legal institution. It was a personal agreement between men who needed each other. And the person holding it together was the one with the money, the connections, and the most to lose from open conflict. Without Crassus, no counterweight, no moderating force, no financial interest in maintaining an uneasy peace. Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, 6 years after Carrhae. He defeated Pompey. He became dictator. He was assassinated in the Senate in 44 BC. The wars that followed tore the Roman world apart. Octavian, eventually renamed Augustus, emerged from the wreckage as the first emperor. The Republic, 500 years old, the foundational political experiment of the Western world, was gone. And it began because a 60-year-old man with a financial empire and an inferiority complex chose to march into a desert he didn't understand, against an enemy he hadn't studied, using tactics designed for a different kind of war entirely. Here is what I keep coming back to. Shurna did not beat Rome by being stronger. He was outnumbered 3-1. He had no infantry, no siege capability, no depth of resources beyond those camel trains of arrows. He had no plan for a sustained campaign and didn't need one. What he had was a ruthless understanding of two things: the terrain he was fighting on and the psychology of the man he was fighting against. Crassus needed glory. Shurna made sure he got the opposite. Crassus needed to close the distance and fight on Roman terms. Shurna made certain the distance was never closed. Crassus believed the Parthians would eventually run out of arrows. Shurna had packed the answer to that assumption on the backs of camels before the battle even started. Every single Roman advantage, discipline, formation, experience, short-sword lethality at close range, was neutralized within the first hour, not by superior force, not by a brilliant frontal assault, but by a 29-year-old who had understood with cold and complete precision exactly what Rome expected, and had prepared something Rome had never seen before. That is the real lesson of Carrhae, not that Rome could be beaten, Rome had been beaten before. But that the most dangerous thing that can happen to any powerful institution, military, political, corporate, national, is the moment it stops being able to imagine being wrong. The Romans marched into that desert expecting a certain kind of battle, the kind they always won. They never seriously considered that the battlefield, the weapons, the tactics, the entire rules of engagement might simply not apply to what was waiting for them. Crassus didn't lose to Smyrna. He lost to his own certainty. The battlefield at Carrhae still exists. You can stand on that flat Syrian plain today and look out at the same horizon those Roman legions looked at in June 53 BC. The same sky, the same heat radiating off the same earth. There's nothing there, no monument large enough, no museum adequate to what happened, just land. 20,000 men died on that plain. 10,000 were marched east into a history that swallowed them whole. The greatest republic the Western world had ever produced began its final spiral that afternoon. And the man who engineered all of it, Smyrna, who at 29 had done something no one in the ancient world had managed, was dead within a year, executed by his own king. No monument for him either. History is strange that way. The people who change it most completely are sometimes the ones it forgets most thoroughly. And sometimes a single afternoon on a flat, featureless piece of desert quietly reshapes the next 2,000 years of civilization. Carrhae was both. If this video made you see the fall of the Roman Republic differently, if there is now a camel train of arrows and a severed head somewhere in your mental model of how Julius Caesar became dictator, then this channel is doing exactly what I built it for. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next video goes somewhere that makes a desert catastrophe look almost peaceful by comparison. And drop a comment before you go. I asked you 2 questions in this video and I read every single response. Tell me which one you're still thinking about. I'll see you in the next one.